Hello, welcome. My name is Ellie Demarchelier. I'm a proud disability rights campaigner and I'll be your MC tonight. As people are coming in, I'll just tell you a little bit about tonight's event, which is being put on by the Disability Dialogue. The Disability Dialogue is creating a new space where people with disability can come together, talk about the problems that are important to them, and start to build solutions to the challenges we face. It is designed to be inclusive, accessible, collaborative, respectful, but most importantly, fun. When we get going fully, the Disability Dialogue will do a bunch of things that we hope you will be a part of. In the meantime, we're kicking off with events like this, which we've called Open Dialogues. These conversations are going to be led by people with disability, not just me and my panel, who I will introduce to you in a moment, but also you, the audience, through our civility tool. I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather. I am on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I recognise their continued connection to the land and waters of this beautiful place and acknowledge that they never ceded sovereignty. I respect all Wurundjeri elders and ancestors and the First Nations people here today. So what are we going to be doing tonight? This is the plan. We'll have our panelists lead us through some issues that they're passionate about. Then we're going to take a deep dive into employment experiences of people with disability. And then we're going to have a specific look at the sort of employer the disability sector should be. To be clear, when we talk about the disability sector, we mean everyone: service providers, disability representative organisations, employment services, everyone. There is a huge industry about us. We should be involved in how it works. It makes it less about us and more with us. To help us achieve this conversation, we have our fabulous panel. Todd Winther is an academic and consultant. Emma Bennison is Chief Innovation Officer at Life Without Barriers. And Luke Nelson is a Policy Officer at Inclusion Australia. We are also joined by our special guest, Chrissy Antonopoulos, who is a disability researcher who has been doing some really important work around disability and employment. But first, I'm going to tell you, before I bring them all up on the screen, a little bit about our civility feedback tool. If you haven't attended one of these events before, you can either log in through your phone or through the link. If you're on a laptop or a computer, highly recommend grabbing your phone. It makes it much easier to interact. You'll see a QR code appear on the screen, and there's also a link in the chat. For those using a laptop, grab your mobile and use the QR code on the screen or click the link in the chat. Fill out one of the questions and hit submit, and you're ready to move on to the next question. It's designed the whole way through so that you can go at your pace. Jump on now and let us know you're ready to go by hitting the heart button. I'll give people a few seconds to jump on before we go to the questions. Although, before we get to the hard stuff, I love nothing more than a good icebreaker. So for tonight, I want to know, if your life had a theme song, what would it be? What song would be your theme song to your life? I might bring up our panel. Todd, Emma, Luke, what would your theme songs be?
Well, I could be cheeky, Ellie, and say Elton John's "I'm Still Standing," given that the weekend.
Legend.
I was only just dancing to that about 15 minutes ago, Todd. I'm not even joking.
Well, isn't that ironic?
Yeah. Can I tell you, my song, not so much my theme song, but my pump up song, getting me ready, like getting me like particularly ready for like to campaign and to really get going was always Beyonce's Freedom. And I don't know if you've seen, but Kamala Harris has made that her campaign theme song, and it's everywhere at the moment. And I'm like, so I'm like constantly pumped up, ready to go, ready to win a presidential election. Let's go, let's beat Trump. That's my song. I just can't believe it that my theme song is Kamala's theme song. So that's pretty cool. We have some answers from the audience. Don't stop thinking about tomorrow. Well, any Fleetwood Mac is pretty great. We Can Be Heroes by Bowie. It'll Be All Right in the Long Run. Pump Up the Volume. We've got some bangers here. We should start a playlist. Emma, what's your thoughts?
I've got so many, but I always like to listen to My Shot from Hamilton, because I just love that notion, you know, that I'm not going to throw away my shot.
Yeah.
And yeah, I really like that one for getting pumped up.
I know, it has to be a pump up song, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I think so anyway. What a Wonderful World, Blame It on the Boogie, Sunshine. Taylor Swift has a very famous song at the moment called I Can Do It With a Broken Heart. And I've changed the lyrics to I Can Do It With a Broken Body. And it's all about like she can hit her mark, she can hit her like stride, she can sing for the audiences even with a broken heart. I can do it all with a broken body, like bring it, even on my worst days. So I think we've got some great songs here. Thanks everyone for joining in. What about you, Luke?
I've got to say, Danger Zone by, I don't know who the singer is, but yeah,
Kenny Loggins.
Yeah, that's
Kenny
the one.
Loggins?
That's the one. Yeah. Whenever I do an
Danger
event.
Zone.
Yeah.
I love that song.
Yep.
That's a great song. All right, well, that's put me in a good mood. I haven't found what I'm looking for. You too. That's a little bit more like contemplating, isn't it? The Gambler.
Ooh.
Gosh, what a song. All right. Well, that's put me in a great mood to start our provocations, our discussions on the issues that we're passionate about right now. What's got you guys fired up? Well, I know exactly what has. The way we want to structure these dialogues is to have an open discussion on issues that interest our panelists, and then we'll go to our deep dive into a specific issue. As a visual description, I want to let people know I have our question on the screen with an image of a woman with curly hair yelling passionately into a megaphone. That's not quite the way we're doing it, but you get the vibe. We have a lot we want to say, and we're looking for an opportunity to make some noise. So let's start our hot takes. Todd, you want to know, why do people with disability have to constantly justify their basic human needs? Take it away.
Well, I'm sure we're all familiar with the current debate over the NDIS about cost overruns and how things cost too much money. But running at the same time as that is the new legislation that is currently before Parliament. It's in the Senate being considered at the moment, and a core part of that piece of legislation is, do we need to change the definition of the building block of the NDIS to justify all our supports, which is commonly known as Section 34 of the NDIS Act, also known as reasonable and necessary. And given the debate over the cost overruns and the constant talk of how people with disability can only get government-funded supports, using that definition of reasonable and necessary, it got me to thinking, why do I have to justify reasonable and necessary to have a shower? Why do I need to justify extra supports to go out into into the community? And why must those basic rights, as a fundamental example, have to be justified in terms of economic need as to what is considered important for the country? Why isn't other economic costs that non-disabled people take for granted, such as expensive cars or infrastructure that we might not necessarily need in terms of expensive stadiums or other expensive venues? Why do we have to always bear the burden of being scrutinised?
Emma, the thinking, this kind of thinking was implicit in the panic around people with disability receiving sex therapies and support. The outrage that people with disability even had these needs. Oh my God, people with disability and sex, who would have thought it? Seemed to talk to something bigger. How did you view that story when it hit the news in this context?
Well,
Sorry, I asked Emma, but I'm happy to come back to you, Todd.
Oh, sorry, go, Emma.
Yeah, look, it was horrifying. But I mean, not altogether surprising because, you know, it's not the first time we've seen this kind of storyline, this kind of narrative play out, is it? You know, there is just this underlying assumption, and I think it goes also to the topic of employment that we're going to come to later. But, you know, there's this underlying assumption that somehow we don't have basic human needs, and then the flow on from that assumption is that therefore we don't have basic human rights. And so, you know, it's really problematic, and it's concerning that although, you know, many people have done an enormous amount of work to try to shift attitudes towards people with disability, over many years, there is still this pervasive sense that we are not really fully human, to be blunt. And it's really disturbing to me that persists despite all our best efforts.
Now, I'm going to go back to Todd, but while I do that, I want to know what the audience thinks. Let us know what supports you have to justify again and again and again and again, and tell us how you feel about that. Todd, you obviously had thoughts around that story and the kind of narrative that happened when the story around sex therapies and supports came out, and what that spoke to. Tell us what you thought.
Sex therapy is only a fraction of the argument. If you paid attention to what the Royal Commission released at the end of last year, we know that people with disabilities don't have knowledge of what their rights are, don't fundamentally understand what protected behaviours are. So it's not just the actual physical act of intimacy and sex. It's about teaching people with disabilities and supporting them to be navigated around the community in that environment, not knowing how to develop relationships, because historically people with disabilities have been segregated in the community. And I know, as a person with a disability, I was taken away from sexual education classes and put into special education learning because it was assumed that I would need to be taught that sort of thing. So just talking about the physical act of intimacy alone is really like talking about the last quarter of a football match. You know the end result, but you don't know the context of what comes before, and therefore you need the whole picture to understand what the argument is, rather than going to the sensational talking point.
Couldn't agree more. Absolutely. This is about healthy sexual relationships, not just, you know, sex workers, as
Yeah.
all the headlines like to read. But Luke, that education point does actually, you told me yesterday that you had to actually prove you wanted to go to school. You had to justify wanting to go to school.
Well,
what happened there?
So my background is a special education background. So, but our teacher always said to us, right? I remember sitting around the table and they said to us, this is the last year of school and this will lead into employment later, is all you will do in your life, okay, will be in a sheltered workshop. And I use that term very lightly. I apologize for the terminology. You will be good enough for a sheltered workshop and that's all you are good for. That's all you are good for. So I said to my teacher at the time, I said, you are wrong. I said, and mind you, this is back in 2007. This is back in the days when, like, early 2000s. So education for people with disabilities, it's still not the best, but hopefully it becomes better than when I started, you know, because one of the things that I'm passionate about is making sure that everybody gets a chance to be educated the way they want to be educated. Absolutely.
And, you know, to be closed off and have to justify wanting a different way in life is at that age is terrifying. But Todd, so we have to constantly justify our needs. No one is disagreeing with that. That is the lived experience of disabled people everywhere. But what is the way through? How can we do this better?
Well, I think we need to reframe the conversation. Instead of looking at the NDIS in dollars and cents, we have to treat disabled people as people first and not dollar figures that need to be measured against some sort of criteria. We don't measure other minority groups as overtly in terms of economic value. We've got to scrutinise the overall costs of the NDIS, but we've got to recognise the overall contribution to the community. And I know we in the disability sector do that really well, but those outside of the disability sector don't really understand the nuances of that argument. So we as a disability sector unfortunately bear the burden of educating the masses to say, instead of classifying us as an economic burden, the old saying that you used to talk about, Ellie, at every Australian counts, about that dollar investment returning more than double the economic value.
$2.30
Exactly.
for every dollar. $2.30
right.
response. I'll never forget that.
No.
And we know that all by heart, but also we've got to present the other side of the political argument. When the politicians play whack-a-mole to us, we've got to be more assertive, but present our argument, not argumentatively, but more forcefully, so we can get cut through in the general community.
But can I say, Todd, you know, in that Defend Our NDIS campaign, we did have that research and it was important to pivot away from cost. But we know that people's stories are much stronger than any economic research can be. You know, me telling my stories of before I was in the 3 years before I was in the NDIS, I was in the ICU 6 times. And in the 3 years after I was in the NDIS, I've been in the ICU 0 times. That's more strong than a dollar compared to $2.30. People's stories are actually our strength in the disability sector, not economic numbers. So I think we've got to stay true to who we are as well. All right, we've got something else, something that I'm very passionate about. Emma, you have a simple provocation. Why do airports hate disabled people? On the screen, we have an image of a woman with dark hair and a leather jacket, pulling her hair out, looking stressed at an airport. So go on, Emma. I'm going to let you loose on this one. What is it with airports and disabled people?
Well, I'm going to be really transparent about this actually and say that this wasn't actually my provocation. This was actually Elle Gibbs' provocation, and Elle wasn't then able to be here tonight. But what's funny about that is that this would have been my provocation if anyone had asked me, because this is literally, you know, my current favorite topic, because it's just, it's getting more and more difficult to do air travel. There's absolutely no doubt in my mind
Impossible.
about that. And I believe that it's gotten worse since COVID. And I think there are reasons for that. I think, you know, the staff turnover has risen, the training has deteriorated, the corporate memory in the airlines is not what it used to be. And we are suffering. We are all suffering as a result of that. And, you know, a week now doesn't go by when you don't hear horror stories from people with disability who've had their wheelchairs broken, or they've been, you know, dropped, or people have been injured. I had a case earlier in the year where I waited for an hour and a half on a hard plastic chair for a meet and assist person. And, you know, one of the points I wanted to make, Ellie, is that this actually also links back to the topic of employment, because there is this underlying assumption that I often feel, and I think it's a fair assumption, it's a fair judgment, that oftentimes there's a sense when I'm sitting around waiting for meet and assist that it's okay because I would have nothing better to do.
Right.
And, you know, I can't tell you the number of times when I was the CEO previously, and I'd be walking through the airport talking to a meet and assist person, and they'd go, "Oh, so you're going on holidays, are you?" And I'd say, "No, I'm traveling for work." And then they'd go, "Oh, and what do you do?" And it was often in this very patronizing tone. And I would say, "Oh, I'm actually a CEO." And the conversation would just stop, because they simply just could not get their head around the fact that A, I had a job and I wasn't on holiday, and B, that I could actually run an organization. So I think it's just this underlying assumption that A, we're essentially just glorified pieces of luggage, and we just have to wait until somebody's got time to deal with us, and then hopefully, you know, if we're lucky, they don't injure us in the process. And then also that, you know, we don't have anything better to do with our time. And I think it's just incredibly disrespectful, and really impacts on people's mental health and on people's ability to be productive. And so I really think we need to strongly call for tighter airline regulation. It's not enough just to rely on the individual airlines to do the right thing, because they're not doing the right thing. And so, you know, we definitely need government to step in and work with us to get a better approach to regulating air travel in this country.
But they also just see it as a risk. Like, we can't, you're not allowed to have 2 electric wheelchairs on a plane. And when I asked Alan Joyce about that, he said it's just not structurally possible. And I said, well, we can fly people to the moon, but we can't put 2 electric wheelchairs on a plane. And he said, yeah, we can't. And I was like, it's just ridiculous. But Luke, you've been traveling a lot. You're a traveler. You've seen it done better in other places with priority lines for disabled people. Tell me about how you've seen it done better overseas.
So in Europe, they prioritize us so much more better than Australia. Like, I've been in situations where they've seen us and they just come straight to the front of the line and just walk straight through. It's like you go through customs, and in attractions you can get in for free. You can do that. You get straight to the front of the line, and this is in countries that are older than Australia is. So I think Australia has a lot way to go. But just on the airport issue, like, I was in Hawaii, and when I landed in Hawaii, they come up to me and goes, "Hi, sir. Unfortunately, we have lost your wheelchair. So you can imagine the conversation we had after that. So just on that, it's really interesting topic.
Yeah, it certainly is. Everyone has a story. I want to know yours, Todd. What is the best and worst travel experience you've had?
Having a powered wheelchair runs the gamut of the whole experience. It's interesting when I traveled to the United States for my honeymoon a while back. You really notice the difference in the rights culture between Australia and the United States, where the United States is obviously really passionate about putting the individual rights first. So it's all about giving the person with a disability maximum chance to do the most with their individual independence, rather than that relying on the collective responsibility of the community. And so my best experiences were traveling in airlines around America. Actually, they were far more approachable and far more keen to take on feedback about what to do with the powered wheelchair, whereas particularly domestically, it varies from airport to airport in terms of how they treat your equipment, but also how they deal with you on a one-to-one basis.
Yeah, absolutely. You never know. Every time you go to the airport, there's a new rule. Like suddenly yesterday I had to put the battery, it had to be in a bag. Like I've traveled how many times? It's never had to be in a bag
I had
before.
that the other week. I had that.
Yeah.
I'm glad it wasn't just me who had it. I had it the other week when I was going to Sydney. They said to us, you got to put it in a bag, which we already knew about. But I'm glad that it wasn't just me that's done it. I'm glad that there's a person that's done it.
And so we had to purchase something from a shop to buy and get it back. Like it's just every rule. It changes the but certainly what I'm hearing from you guys is Australia is much worse than other places. So we've got to step up our game. Finally, Luke, you want to talk a bit. I'm just getting word from backstage that everyone is just agreeing entirely about airports. Everyone is just going, oh my God, preach. That is absolutely the case. So I'm glad that we're hitting a nerve and that it's not just us that is experiencing this, but I just wonder there has to be a campaign in this somewhere.
For sure.
Finally, Luke.
Sorry,
Yeah,
Ellie. Can I just quickly say one more thing? And that is that the remedies are really challenging too. So if you do choose to utilise the Human Rights Commission process and lodge a DDA complaint and go through that process, like that's not an easy process. It's really lengthy. It's really difficult. And if your complaint then doesn't if it doesn't settle, then you have to look at taking it to court, and the cost of doing that is prohibitive for most people. So that it's not just that the system needs to be better regulated, it's that the pathways that we have to remedy the situation are just they're not good enough. So it's a bigger issue.
Yeah, lots to do. Finally, Luke, you want to talk about the difference between equity and equality. We're bringing up an image on the screen. You have two images side by side to show the difference between equality and equity. The image is of three people, all of different heights, standing behind a fence, trying to watch a baseball game. On the left is the equality side. All three are standing on the same sized box, which helps one person see over the fence who couldn't see before, but one of them still can't see over the fence to watch the game. On the right side, the equity side, each person has the right amount of boxes or support to see over the fence and watch the game. Luke, what does this image say to you, and why did you want to bring it to us tonight?
Well, thanks, Al. And I'm interested to see what everyone else thinks on the panel. This is something. Australia is we're a young country, which I understand, but I've been to a lot of other countries where people with disabilities, there are access that are better. there's a lot of other ways to go. So I think, and I've got to be careful what I say this, because we don't want to upset anyone, but I think Australia as a young nation needs to work with other countries on how to best work together with their disability community to see, for example, have like I've seen some stair lifts in Australia, but mostly in Europe. I've seen stair lifts that come up to stairs, or if I was in the Vatican, and you could do access, but in there that are very good. So how come in Australia, where we are a young nation, but I think we've got a long way to go. I think we have a long way to go to reach potential.
Yeah, so access is clearly not being done right here in Australia. We have a picture of you in your wheelchair in Italy, giving 2 thumbs up with a big smile on your face. Can you tell us what's happening here?
Basically, that's outside, if I remember correctly, that's outside just outside the Colosseum. And I went to Pompeii, but I must give a massive shout out to, which I don't often do, but massive shout out to support workers, because without the people that help us or support us, right, I wouldn't be able to do that. I wouldn't be. So I lived my dream by being able to go overseas with help. But it was still achievable. It was still achievable by, yes, it was a bit awkward. My wheelchair did get a few broken things and all that, but it was still achievable with support. It was still achievable because society has recognised that we want to be included. But I think it still has a long way to go.
Todd, where have you seen the best places for support for people, for disabled people? Where have you seen best practice?
Well, it's a community by community approach, and really, the disability sector particularly leads the way in this. But to bridge upon Luke's point, equality isn't really an accurate representation of what people with disabilities need, because each disability is different, and each person experiences their disability in a different way. And so what we really need is equity rather than equality, because we can't have a uniform standard to accurately measure the diverse nature of impairment. So how do we do that? We use equality as a bridge to equity to develop more tools to suit people's impairment.
And that really brings me to my question to you, Emma. How would policies look different if they focused on equity instead of equality?
Well, I just want to tell a really brief story, which is the first time I went to the UK to an arts festival over there, and I was really shocked by the level of access, like really, really amazingly good access. And I think one of the reasons that it was so good was because people with disability are more visible in the UK in general, not always, but in general. And to give you an example, I was able to walk around that festival, go and see the acts that I wanted to see, and was able to access audio description for whatever I wanted to see. So I didn't have to choose the ones that were audio described. I could just say, I'd like audio description with this one, please. And an audio describer would just materialize and give me audio description. I mean, that's just unheard of. It just doesn't happen. And so in terms of policy, I mean, I think it is that bespoke, kind of ability to be flexible. And also, I think one of the reasons that the UK and to some extent the US are better off in this regard is because their legislation, their discrimination legislation, has a lot more teeth. And I think hopefully that's what we're going to be moving towards in this country too. But I think, if we're really wanting equity, then the onus needs to be not on us, as Todd was saying at the beginning, not on us to justify why we need what we need, or to justify the fact that we were discriminated against or there was inequity, but it needs to be on the perpetrators of that discrimination to convince us that they didn't actually discriminate. Because until we flip the script, we're never going to get that change. So I think that's really important.
And to that point, I understand Andrew in the chat said, we'll just lose the fence and we'll have full inclusion. That's
exactly
a great
right.
point. I understand the chat is just still going off about airports, which I love so much. But I do have a question for the audience, which is, what is the one thing that could make the world more equitable for you? If you could choose one thing to happen to make the world more equitable, what would that be? And I see your face like, where would I go? But if you choose one thing to happen overnight, what would it be?
Gosh, that's difficult. All of our disability service providers and disability organisations across the board, disability representative organisations, and the whole sector would be led by people with disability. That's a bit provocative.
Yes,
but
I love it.
But I don't think anyone really seriously could argue that that's not a good idea in the long term, because we really need to be able to see ourselves and the rest of the community. If we're talking about why we still have serious attitudinal barriers, it's because we're not visible enough to the community. So this is the place we need to start. We need to start in our own backyard. If we can't get it right in our own sector, how can we expect the rest of the world to get it right? So
love it. I vote for that one. That's a great idea. Luke, if you could change one thing overnight to make the world more equitable, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good question. Oh, that's a really hard question. No, I got it. So I think no matter what people need in terms of accessible communication, right, it is just expected to, like, say, if you go into a police station or a court, right, and you request easy read or whatever you need, then it's there. Every document that is a legal document, every document that a bill or anything that comes from the government is in accessible information. And we're talking across the world here. We're not just talking about Australia, we're talking across the world.
Yeah.
Done. Fabulous. We're getting through responses from the audience. We have no homelessness, listen more and talk less. Because I'm still thinking of travel, it's that people with disability will travel in their own chairs on the plane and have bathroom options available.
Wow, I'd love that. Yeah.
Yes, that's brilliant.
Flat access, educate all of society that we're not less or different. I'm just me. Education, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. More people with disability in positions of influence and outcomes like political, medical, law, justice, disability service providers. Event organisers should be consult access advisors, people choosing to meet my needs, accessible housing, having accessible transportation, and user-friendly websites. What a list.
Wow,
could you
that's
imagine
awesome.
if all of that happening overnight, Todd? What would you add to the list?
Well, I would add to the list the fact that the Royal Commission talked about the fact that we have all these political rights, not only in Australia, but throughout the world. And the dominant trend is that the government has the ability to enforce these political frameworks and these independent rights, but for various reasons choose not to do so. And I look at those responses, and the majority of those responses encapsulate things like United Nations Convention on the Rights of People with Disability. We talked about accessible housing and the fact that the government hasn't ratified the livable housing standards in New South Wales and Victoria, New South Wales and Western Australia rather. So it's all very well and good to have all these fancy documents to say we believe in this stuff. The next step is to enforce those political rights. So the changes that we see on the screen can actually be enforced, and we can actually be part of real change.
Amazing.
Okay.
We have someone in the chat say, pay us for our sharing our lived experience,
Yes.
proper funding of DROs. Nicole says support in the workplace. Well, that brings us to our deep dive tonight. What a perfect segue, Nicole. Our deep dive tonight is all about employment. If you look at the statistics when it comes to disability and employment, it is grim. The unemployment rate for people with disability is twice that of people without disability, and that hasn't changed in over 30 years, actually exactly my lifetime. So it seems to be a big problem that nobody can fix, which means we have to think and try things differently. I want to bring in Chrissy Antonopoulos to tell us about the research she's done into attitudes towards disability employment, because I think we can all agree it starts with attitudes. Chrissy, what did you learn through your research?
Hi, everyone. Yes, so I did my PhD research on implicit bias, personal values, and employment of people with disability, broadly in the field of psychology, as I'm a psychologist. So that came from my lived experience of having a disability and experiencing discrimination and the difficulties in getting employment myself. So what we found was well, firstly, implicit bias. So you might have heard it as unconscious bias. So it's the biases that we all have that we're not aware of. So they can be things that influence our decisions and some of our behaviors. So an example might be when we get on public transport, we might subconsciously choose where we sit next to a certain type of person or avoiding a person. And that's probably our unconscious bias or our implicit biases, making those choices, and we don't even know that that's happening. So what we did was we looked at all the implicit bias research that's happened all over the world towards people with disability, and we found that overwhelmingly there was negative bias towards people with disability. There wasn't any research in Australia, so we didn't know where we sit in the world, but we have collected data on that, and we've got the preliminary data, and we found that around 80% of people negatively implicitly stereotyped people with disability as incompetent. So this means that people aren't even aware that they automatically will think that we are incompetent. So then there's, I guess, how does that play out in employment, and how does that play out in real life? Another part of my research, I interviewed employers, and I asked them, how do you feel about hiring people with disability? And there was a whole lot of different views, but there was a real distinct difference between people who had experience. Either they were disabled themselves, or they had hired people with disability or worked with people with disability, and then people who hadn't. And a big difference was between whether we should share if we have a disability. And the people that had no experience or very little experience would say, you should put it on your CV. You should put it from the moment that you apply. Whereas the people who had a disability or had experience would say, you should put it at the end, if that. And if you don't want to disclose, you shouldn't have to, because it's not really relevant to the application process. After, when you get a job, then that's probably the best place to start talking about it, with what adjustments and all those sorts of things that you need. So there was a really big difference. Another finding was that people had really strong negative emotions in the workplace. So people would say they felt uncomfortable, or it was off-putting that we were trying to hire people with disability, and that was influencing their hiring decisions. Another finding, had lots of findings, was that people's values were influencing whether they would hire a person. And we also found that values were linked to implicit bias. So people who valued, now value is a belief or something that's important. So it's things that would motivate us, things that make us do the job that we do, or make us do charity work, or make us have our political views. So that those are what our values are. And so if we value concern for others, living in a world where we're all equal, we'd have less bias and be more likely to hire someone with a disability. Whereas if we were more conservative, if we valued the way things are, we like the status quo, we like the way structures are, we will have more implicit bias and less likely to think that a person with disability is suitable. So I guess that kind of sums up 5 years of work in a few minutes. But it kind of, I think the biggest thing that I've learned from this is that implicit bias is quite pervasive. It's something that we all have, that even having a disability, we can have implicit bias towards other disabled people and towards ourselves. And it's probably influencing a lot of different areas. There's a lot of implicit bias research to do with other areas, so against different racial groups or cultural groups, and we know that the small amounts of bias have really big effects, and we know that there's systemic issues, systemic racism, all those things. So with implicit bias towards people with disability, it's actually larger. There is more bias. So if we look at that and we know what racial bias there is, and then we think of, okay, there's even more bias towards people with disability, it kind of paints a picture of how much work we probably need to do on this issue to make, I guess, more systemic changes.
Wow, like we know it, like you know it as a disabled person, but hearing it as statistics still hits hard. I'm going to just hand over to our panel, Emma in particular. I'm interested to know whether those findings resonate with you and what resonates from those findings with you.
A few things. It reminds me of an experience I had a long time ago now, that stays with me, where a very rare employer actually was honest enough to tell me why he didn't hire me in a leadership role. And he said, look, we just decided that there was a lot of travel involved in the job and it would be very difficult for you, but really we just didn't think you'd be a safe pair of hands. And so, you know, that really, I think, is a case in point. I think a lot of people probably think that, or maybe they don't even consciously think that, because we are talking about unconscious bias, but it is absolutely alive and well. I thank that person for being honest enough to share that with me, because it just confirmed my suspicions. But I think the other thing it really highlights for me is we're moving into an age where AI is just going to become really, really pivotal in terms of hiring decisions. And of course, where does AI get its information from? It gets its information from humans and the way that humans think and make decisions. And so that's actually quite scary to me. If you consider Chrissy's findings, that you know, we really need to do some training of AI to really make sure that we can weed out those implicit biases. And people who are a lot smarter than me, I'm sure, will work out how to do that. But I think it is something that we should all be really concerned about, because it is going to impact us disproportionately as people with disability, I suspect.
Absolutely. Todd, what are your takeaways from Chrissy's research and what she had to say there?
Well, like the comments said, it just confirmed what we basically all suspected. Chrissy was talking before we went live about that 80% figure about people having explicit bias against people with disabilities because they view us as incompetent, and a few around the panel said, oh, that's a high figure, but to me, I thought that figure seemed to be actually low, and although that comes across as quite cynical, that gives us a sense of that internalized ableism that we all
But
sometimes
Todd,
feel. Yeah, go
can
ahead.
can I challenge you on that?
Yeah.
20% of the population is disabled. So 20% implicit bias, like, doesn't have an implicit bias that we're incompetent. That's just us.
But,
Like,
but also, Ellie, if I can just go right back and say, people with disabilities might be biased against other people with
absolutely.
disabilities as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I think, again, it goes back to that cultural argument about allowing or putting people with disabilities in powerful places, not just within the disability sector or as sporting champions. But when's the last time we saw people with disabilities on the board of a bank or a tech
Yep, that's
startup
right.
or a media company? We've got to think broader and wider than the disability sector so we can push these issues towards the mainstream.
I agree with you, Todd. The only thing I would say is if we can't model it in the disability sector, then we're just giving them an excuse to say it's too hard. So we have to. Our sector needs to be where it starts. It doesn't need to be where it ends, but it needs to be where it starts.
Yeah, we need to fan it out. Like, sure, we have to model it in the disability community, but at the same time as we're doing it in the disability community, you have to make the tentacles go wider and reach a bit further onward.
Yeah. Agree.
Luke, what does this conversation make you think about?
I think, like, I agree that the figures are high. The figures are very high, right? But if I look at my experience, I think, and this is where I've been so lucky in my life, so fortunate with the organizations that I support, is I have been given a go. And I think that's what, if you look at the Australian adage, give someone a go, right? So I think a lot of people with disabilities, okay, need to say to the employer, if you're able to, because there are a lot of employers that are, I don't want to say scared, but I'd say cautious about hiring people with disabilities. Because I think the best way that employers can learn about hiring someone with disability is working with us, working beside us and going, okay, right, we've got that hurdle done. So how can I best improve my business to make you want to come work for me? Because if you look at it, a lot of people with disabilities have been involved in the same companies for 17, like say my employer that I've been involved with sometimes, I started as a volunteer and I've been there 17 years. So I think it's more about also working with the organizations and working with the employers to make their business inclusive. But we do need an inclusive workforce.
Yeah, absolutely. Chrissy, we'll come back with questions from the audience later. But for now, I'm just interested in your ideas on how we address implicit bias.
Yeah, so it's a big one. I think the most effective way to address implicit bias is to actually start conversations and to talk about it, to think about, you know, what our biases are, can be confronting, because we don't want to, you know, be biased against people or groups of people, but we all have our preferences and our biases. So that's a start. In terms of changing and challenging biases, having meaningful interactions. So things where we're connecting with people, things like this where we're learning from each other, going into the workplace where, you know, we work with someone and we kind of lead by example. Those are how the biases are changed more, I guess, authentically. There's some research on looking at implicit bias interventions, and the ones where you've got people together, learning together, working together, whether that be kids in school, whether that be adults in sporting groups, whether that be in the workplace, that's where the change happens. Whereas when you play videos about, you know, people's experiences, it doesn't quite connect. It needs to be those one-to-one kind of personal levels, which kind of does make it harder because then it's, you know, there's a lot of interactions that need to happen. But that's, I guess, what's shown to change people's biases on the ground. More practically, I guess, in employment, we'd be looking at people who make the decisions. So what are your biases? How are you feeling? As I said, I'm a psychologist, so I come from like the behavioral point of view. What's going on there? What are your thoughts on this person? Why do you think that? I guess kind of making some a structured way to question our biases in that specific situation would be helpful too.
All right. Well, there's some thinking around how we get there, but really what it is inclusion. Is we need inclusion. We need full inclusion.
True
in
inclusion.
society. Yeah. In
Yeah,
order to
that's right.
break down bias. All right. Thank you so much, Chrissy. We'll bring you back later in the conversation. Oh, I just started hearing myself. Has it gone weird? Hello?
Yep.
Okay, well, I'm back.
Yep.
Now, Emma, I want to talk to you about, you're working on a number of, can everyone hear me?
Yeah, it is sounding a bit strange.
All right, I'm going to do a quick texting, 1 second. Okay, can everyone hear me?
Oh, it's better.
You there, El?
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm back.
Yeah.
Chrissy, I want to talk, sorry, Emma, I want to talk to you about some of the things you're working on with the disability sector, some projects to address some of these issues and actively create more jobs for people with disability. Can you talk about some of those projects?
Yeah, so I think that the really significant one that we're working on at the moment is the Disability Employment Catalyst project, and that is a project that's led by the Achieve Foundation, and it's funded by the Paul Ramsay Foundation, and it's there are 3 service provider organisations who are partners with the Achieve Foundation on the project, and that's Life Without Barriers, Urala, and Achieve Australia. And basically what we are attempting to do is to really rethink the way that we do disability employment, so that we can employ people with disability in the disability disability sector over time, but at the moment in disability service providers at scale. And so we're looking, you know, very carefully at things like, you know, how do we make it more feasible for people with disability to be employed as disability support workers. We're looking at how do we make sure that our workplaces are as inclusive as possible. We're looking at things like, you know, in our organisations, because we are providing services to people with disability, there's often a tendency for what we call benevolence bias, where you know, people who have been used to working with people with disability as clients or as recipients of services are not used to working with us as colleagues, let alone having us as potentially their bosses. So you know, there's work to be done there as well. But certainly the project is looking at how we do that work and how we do it in a way that is scalable. So we're not just doing a couple of people here and a couple of people there. We're trying to do it at scale so that we can really get some good models in place, that deal with things like, recruitment and also support in the workplace, and really trying to do things differently and think outside the square. And it also includes training as well. What does good training look like in this context? So, it's it's something that's it's still fairly early in the piece, but we're really excited about what the possibilities are for this project to ultimately end up spawning an entity that is a disability-led entity called the Disability Employment Catalyst that, really takes this model to, the whole of the sector over time. So it's very exciting, very ambitious, but we're really excited to be part of it. And then I was just going to quickly touch on a couple of the other things.
Yeah, please do.
That some of us are doing in the sector. So, Life Without Barriers and Urala, and now a couple of other organisations are starting to introduce internships, executive internships. So we have a CEO intern at the moment, and Urala, I know, has several executive interns, and really what that's about is actually working with people who have already had some executive level experience, and then giving them the opportunity to experience what it's actually like to work in a disability service provider, and to have that level of responsibility. So it's not an observership program. It actually does enable people to get their hands dirty and really experience what it's like, and learn from, and be mentored by executives. So, and that's being rolled out in partnership with the Disability Leadership Institute. So we're really excited about that too. So yeah, and there's lots of other work happening, but those are probably the two that I wanted to highlight.
I understand there's someone in the chat asking, and just in case anyone else is interested, how they can get involved in the Disability Employment Catalyst. We've put a link in the chat for how you can get involved. I'm interested. I just want to reiterate what I said at the beginning of the open dialogue. When we talk about the disability sector, we're talking about everyone now. We're going to be talking about service providers, disability representative organisation, employment services, the whole kind of industry that is built around us, and works for us, but doesn't really work with us at the moment. I think most of us can agree, and can do better at working with us. I'm interested to know from the panel, what has your experiences been like working in the disability sector? Do you think it's better or worse than working in other sectors? Luke, tell us about your work with Inclusion Australia.
So my work, I'm a policy officer, but I go back to how lucky I've been. Like, my employer, Inclusion Australia, has given me a lot of opportunities, not just in the policy officer space, but also in a whole range of different roles. So from easy read testing to going to conferences, being in videos, whole range of different things. And you know what? It's so good to be able to give back to my community, but also to have an employer that is accepting of my needs and inclusive of what I need. So, say for example, my experience has been very good. Any sort of equipment I need and all that kind of stuff. Having good managers, but also having good structures involved, within a company to employ people with disabilities.
We need those good examples. Absolutely. Todd, you work as a consultant. That's a kind of model of working for yourself that seems to work for a lot of people with disability. Why do you think that is? Oh, hold on a second, Todd. We just need to turn on your microphone. All right, give it a go now. Oh no, still not working.
He's not on mute.
We'll just, yeah, there you go. You're all good.
I think COVID was the real hinge point here, because working from home became the norm rather than the exception. We fostered a more inclusive environment without really meaning to. Working from home is essential for me, and it's the only way I could work full time. And through the COVID experience and the work from home culture, that became more widely understood and appreciated, and opened up so many more employment opportunities for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Emma, do you think, I'll put the direct question to you, do you think the disability sector is any better or worse than other sectors for people with disability as employees?
Oh, look, I think all sectors have their pros and cons, and I'm not trying to dodge your question when I say that, Ellie. But I think, I mean, I've had the interesting experience of working both in a disability or in a number of disability representative organisations and leading those organisations, and then coming to Life Without Barriers. And you know, what's been really interesting to me is, you know, when I was leading Blind Citizens Australia, 75% of our staff were blind or vision impaired. And, you know, we moved to remote working way before it was fashionable to do so. And one of the reasons that we did that was because we wanted to be able to get as many blind people who were skilled and qualified into those roles as we possibly could, and also take away some of the stress of, you know, public transport and technology and you know, trying to navigate complex office environments and all those sorts of things. So it is an example of where having a disabled leader can really influence, and I know if Elle was here, she'd be talking about this too, can really influence the way organisations do those sorts of things. And that's why I'm such a proponent of disability leadership, because I think it's really important. But then I think, you know, coming to Life Without Barriers has also been really interesting, because, you know, it's a much larger, massive organisation of over 8,000 staff. And, you know, so that's also had its advantages, because, you know, there's a lot more resources and a lot more support. But, you know, I think you still get the same sorts of challenges no matter what sector you work in. I remember when I used to work for government, you know, I was the only disabled person in the government department I was working in, and I would always be asked if I could test websites and documents and, you know, for accessibility, and you know, those things still happen to me today. So you know, I think sometimes you do have to remind people that just because you happen to be a person with disability working in a disability organisation, it doesn't mean that you're also the accessibility specialist. And you know, so those sorts of things can sometimes be a bit challenging. But generally, I do think, because people are generally working in this sector, well, I would hope always working in this sector for the right reasons, because they want to make life better for people with disability. You know, there is something just, you know, really wonderful, whether you work in a DRO or whether you work in a disability service provider, about working with like-minded people. I mean, I resisted working in this sector for years because I didn't want to be kind of stereotyped. But honestly, it's given me so many opportunities, and I feel incredibly fortunate to be in it. So, you know, I can't say that it's better or worse, but I love it. I think everyone should do it.
Look, as someone who's a bit out of it or a bit removed as a disability rights campaigner, I just have to say the lack of people with disability at the very top still grinds my gears. And I think it's something that the disability sector really has to work at very hard,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the disability sector should be led by people with disability, and that's service providers, DROs, employment services, everyone.
Yeah.
And I think I'm all for setting an absolute mandatory percentage quota of 15% of all workers in the disability sector should be disabled. I think
Yeah.
that's what it should be.
I agree. Can I just say one more thing about that, Ellie? And that is that I'm really sick, heartily sick of this narrative also that says that people with disability are the problem and that we just need our capacity built. I mean, if I had $1 for every time I'd been to a disability leadership course or whatever, I'd be rich. I'm not saying that people with disability don't need to have capacity building, but why is there not an equal emphasis on the organisations that are in this sector having similar capacity building? Because there's just as much capacity building needed in those organisations so that they are ready for us to be at the top as there is for us to be at the top. And I'm just sick of it being so imbalanced. We just need to have an honest conversation that it cuts both ways.
Absolutely. I love that I'm seeing the comments flash up, and the thing that everyone's disagreeing with me on is what the percentage should be. Apparently 15% is way too low.
I was just about to say, I reckon 50%.
50. I'm going with 50.
All right, ambition. I'm all for it. Go 50. I just, setting a quota anywhere at the moment, it would be incredible because we have nothing. But 50%, why not?
Yeah.
Todd, the lack of accommodations and flexibility seems to be one of the real barriers for people with disability. I've been involved in the disability employment catalyst, and like accommodations and flexibilities come up in all the conversations I've had. What do you think are some of the other would you agree with that, first of all, hypothesis, and why do you think that is, and what do you think are the other barriers for people with disability working in the disability sector? I'll ask that of the audience too while you're talking.
I agree with that premise of your argument, Ellie, but it's also accessibility issues. And I'm not just talking physical accessibility. I mean, for people with physical disabilities, such as myself, we're not only talking about accessible bathrooms, but we're talking about the ability to have extra long lunch breaks so a support worker can come in and help with the toilet routine, or we might need to have shorter days on short notice because of some physical challenges that we might have. So it's all about accessibility and adaptability, that extra sort of mile that people without disabilities don't often face, to create as flexible environment as possible while ensuring that we have maximum capability to do our job.
I think that's absolutely right. Just the behind the scenes team, can we put up what do you think are the barriers to people with disability working in the disability sector? While I ask that, Emma, a lot of people with disability, again, in the Disability Catalyst program, when I was talking to groups, were really hesitant to work in the disability sector because they had previously had just such terrible work experiences more broadly, like not just in the sector, but in the sector and outside the sector. What are the active ways that employers can rebuild trust with people with disability?
Look, I think to actively seek people out, rather than just sort of putting a job ad up and hoping people will apply. You know, actively connecting in with our disability representative organisations, for example, or on social media or wherever, to actually actively seek people with particular qualifications and invite them in for a conversation. I think we need to be moving to some of those sort of more innovative hiring strategies that are not just traditional, because I think, you know, that also can make the process far more accessible for many people with disability too. But I also think, and I know I'm sounding like a broken record, but, you know, the more visible people with disability can be in those service providers and in the disability representative organisations across the whole sector, the more people are going to start to go, oh, actually, maybe that is for me. You know, maybe it will be different there, because if those people with disability are having a good experience, maybe I will too. Now, of course, no organisation is totally consistent, and you're always going to have, you know, people, you know, who have bad experiences. It's just inevitable in when any group of people come together. But the more I think that we can be demonstrating that it does actually work and that people are having good experiences, and the more that we can talk like we are tonight about those good experiences, I think the more that we will start to see that trust, hopefully, being rebuilt. And I think the one final thing I'd say is, you know, having opportunities for people to just come and try things out. So without kind of it being a formal employment contract or whatever, but, you know, coming and trying things out, but also paying people for their time. Somebody said before, paying people for our lived experience. That is so important. I actually think that's one of the most important ways they can rebuild trust before we even get into an employment relationship with an organisation. You know, there's so much that you can demonstrate by actually valuing people's lived experience and not doing it in a tokenistic way, but doing it in a deep and respectful and dignified way, I think makes all the difference.
Someone's put in their response to what are the barriers, just simply having to be 3 times as amazing as people without disability. So I think that sums it up. Luke,
Sure.
I want to ask, can you see there being advantages or benefits of having people with disability supporting other people with disability?
Love the question, Elle. Love the question. And the answer is yes. Yes, definitely. There is advantages for mentorship. There is advantages for, I don't know what you call it, like a work buddy system. Like, say, if a new person with a disability comes on board, team them up with a person who's been there a couple of years and go, right, this is what you'll be doing. This is the work culture. If I've got any questions, and then talk to the person or talk to the manager or whatever. But yes, definitely, there is a call for that. I reckon that would be absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. Well, I have an audience open-ender and one question that I'd like to finish on for all the panelists tonight, which is, what would change if more people with disability worked in the disability sector? What would be the biggest social change, do you think? Todd, I'll start with you.
Having a disability of any kind teaches you empathy, because you have to appreciate your own body, your own capabilities, your own understanding of what it means to be disabled. And through that experience, you can project that understanding of how people operate and the accommodations it can make for each individual, regardless of ability. So I think if people with disabilities were put in more powerful positions, the world would be much more empathetic and understanding.
Luke, what do you think would change if more people with disability worked in the disability sector?
It would become, I think, the norm. Like, I'd love to see, like, I know there's some OTs with disabilities, but I haven't seen many. I'd like to see doctors with disability, and I've only seen like this become the norm in the like not just the disability sector. If you want to go wider, the workforce, just to see that people with disabilities can be included in the workforce. Yeah.
Create that larger social change. Emma, what do you think? What's the social change that would happen from having more disabled employees in the disability sector?
Well, I think adding to what Todd said about empathy, because that's what I was going to say, but I also think that we're really, really good problem solvers. So I think we get better solutions, more innovative solutions to the really challenging problems that our sector is currently experiencing. But more broadly, I just think it would create a snowball effect, because, you know, if people with disabilities started to see other people with disability, you know, working in our sector and kind of saw what was possible, then, you know, they would be more inclined and have more opportunity to go out and do the same thing. But then more broadly, as we were talking about before, I think, you know, then the rest of society would start to see that, and it would be more visible in the community. And then perhaps we would start getting people with disability on the boards of banks and, God forbid, airlines. That might be a really good thing, actually. But yeah, so I think, you know, it would just start to create a real snowball effect, and it would be very exciting.
It would. Chrissy, I'm just going to bring you back for, we're running out of time, but 1 minute answer really on, you've been listening to this discussion. How does it reflect back on your research, and how does it reflect back on challenging that implicit bias?
I think we need more of these, and it's just so lovely to sit here and to witness all the different ideas and all the different thoughts, and just centering the lived experience. And I think that's what it comes down to. We need to center lived experience to challenge implicit biases, and there's been so many suggestions on ways we can do that, and I hope that we see change, and change sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. Well, with our panel on board and me, trust me, change is not an option. That's
Count me in.
Yeah, I can only think of Beyonce's "Freedom" in the back of my head playing as we march forward. Talking about action, I really want to summarize for the audience some incredible campaigns that are happening right now in the disability sector, because we have got some great things happening. And so I'm just going to spend the last 5 minutes just telling you about some really incredible things that are happening that you can get on board with. If you're feeling inspired by the conversation tonight, if you actually want to take action, here's how you can do it in a few ways. As always, there's a lot happening in the sector, so here's a few ways you can take action. First, CP Active is hosting an event next week, August 6th at 12:30, to talk about the New South Wales Government GRAD program, which is tailored to people with disability. So even if you're not a recent graduate, feel free to come along, or even better, share the link in the chat with someone you think might be interested in learning about it. If you don't know, CP Active is a community of people of all ages who care about making Australia a more inclusive place for people with cerebral palsy and other disabilities. So other disabilities, please come along. They're currently campaigning for more inclusive pathways from education to employment, and government is one of those ways, and have made great progress. So if that's something that sounds like it might be a pathway for you, get along to CP Active. We have another campaign heating up, and I love this one because there was a bit of rivalry between Queensland and New South Wales. The Summer Foundation is working with a bunch of advocacy groups to pressure the New South Wales government to endorse accessible housing standards. It's embarrassing for New South Wales. Shame on you, New South Wales. All other states and territories apart from WA have signed on. What is happening in New South Wales? You may have one state of origin, but if you can't end housing discrimination, you have nothing to boast about. If you are in Sydney, Summer will be delivering a petition to Parliament next Tuesday. Details are in the chat. Make sure you sign that petition. Housing standards are critical, and it is just appalling that New South Wales has not signed on to better housing standards. Finally, something close to my heart, there is an incredibly important campaign running calling on the federal government to fully fund the disability advocacy sector. Advocates play a crucial role in addressing the appalling abuse and neglect of people with disability that was exposed in the Disability Royal Commission. Without immediate government action, independent advocacy organisations will lose staff or close doors altogether. This is a huge risk to the human rights of people with disability, especially those at risk in mainstream services such as housing, health and disability support. You should check out the Speak Up for Advocacy Facebook page to see how you can help. Independent advocacy is everything, guys. We need to make sure that it is fully funded, fully supported, and I encourage you to get behind that campaign. So
Couldn't agree more.
that is our homework, getting active on issues that matter. Finally, as we're running these events regularly, I'd love your ideas on topics that you'd like us talking about in future events. If you've got an idea, chuck it in the chat, reach out to me on social media, send me a DM, a tweet, any way you want to, pigeon, anyway. I want to know your ideas for what you want to talk about in these open dialogues. As you can see, they're conversational. We will disagree with each other. We will really have it out to make sure we get to the bottom of these issues and find innovative solutions to them. So I want to know what you want to talk about. These open dialogues are monthly events. So I really hope you join us next month for more debate and discussion. Thank you so much to our panel and to Chrissy. We will take these ideas on board and let you know what next month's special subject will be. What I do know is that we will be presenting the findings from the Disability Discovery Project, which was about foundational support, the thing no one knows anything about, which we undertook last month. We got nearly 300 responses to this, which, you know, was a huge way to hitting our target of 500 and a really, really great effort. Can I just thank everyone tonight, everyone in the chat, for an engaging and lively discussion. I love these more than anything. I love speaking to my community. I love talking with other disabled people. You guys rock. I look forward to seeing you next month. I'm Ellie Demarchelier. Good night.